Okay. Well, aren't we fortunate to be here with Dorothy Heathcote, or Dorothy Heathcote in North America? And I was with Dorothy a year or so ago in Washington, and she got a standing ovation before she began, and one after. Not bad. Today, we're going to have a conversation about some questions about drama, but I want to take just 1 minute, Dorothy, to set the scene, if I may.
Of course.
Because I've known you now for over 35 years. I follow you from country to country like a puppy. And she always turns around and says, "What are you doing here?" "I'm listening to you." And wow, it's been a wonderful time. Those 35 years when I began with Gavin and Dorothy, right here in Durham, where I lived for 2 years or so. And it was a pretty fine place to live. And last night, to prepare for the conversation, I reread Gavin's book about Dorothy, called Dorothy Heathcote's Story. And it's a powerful read because as I read it, it was a living through experience because I remember every incident from knowing you and knowing Gavin and having had you in Canada many times. And all your life stories are so clear to me. They're like icons in my computer. So it was a wonderful read. And I woke up in the night because jet lag does that. And here's Dorothy Heathcote lying beside me.
Oh, how nice.
Which is every student's dream, let's face it.
I wish I'd known.
That was the cheeky part. Okay. So you keep teaching, Dorothy. You were in Greece a few weeks ago, going back this summer. Here you are here. You were in Washington with me last year. So tell us why you keep doing it. What is the drive all about? We have so many, I'm not quite through. We have so many early retirements in our country, so many that our pension board is frightened. So you are a person who has kept moving forward, and I want you to talk a bit about that.
Well, I suppose really the reason I do it is that I am still very curious about how learning happens. And I once wrote an article about Gavin, which some people misunderstood as being highly critical. I said he flew over and could see the land and the landscape. But I don't do that. I furrow along like a mole. And occasionally I come up because something strikes me and I have to test it. And I brought my comfort blanket because it's the thing I wrote last week, which is my latest matter of concern. And I think, too, it's such a privilege to be asked. And teachers give you their children. And you know when you take the classes of teachers, in a way, they will reveal themselves through the behaviour of the children. So they are very doubly brave. But it's just curiosity. And I know that Mantle of the Expert is a paradigm for change. I don't think it'll happen in my time, but I think it might begin. And I do believe, without being arrogant, it is a new paradigm. So that's why I go on. And the kids are so bright. You know, they are so bright.
How do you do this, Dorothy, in a classroom that's diverse and multi-ethnic and multinational? What are the differences that today brings with the change in society?
I don't suppose I cope with it very well. I just rather assume that the signals I'll be passing to them, especially with my acting ability, because I do have that, will reassure them that they can respond safely. I did have a conversation recently with a Polish child And I couldn't understand her at all in terms of the words she spoke. I did not know either that she'd not spoken in school yet. But it just happened that I walked in at the moment a couple of student teachers were working with her, and she came to me and talked to me for 20 minutes. And we shared an experience between a dead child who was climbing a chimney, who was only paper. And she put him on my knee and explained to me the whole story. Now, of course, I knew the story because I'd helped the teachers plan it. But what she did with that astonished all of us. And I think it's that makes it worth going on, really.
So I need to answer this question, which is a hard one. Are you a drama teacher or a teacher?
Oh, I'm a teacher. I've never been... First of all, I should acknowledge this amazing shapeshifter that drama is. And I don't care how many ways you do it. Or I've never felt I needed to quarrel with the systems other people find to use as ways of helping children learn. It doesn't bother me. And I'm arrogant enough to think, oh, I've enough to do without bothering about you lot. I'll go on finding this. And in that sense, I've relieved myself of a lot of worries, because I don't have to compete. I can just be amazed at what I hear in this conference, for example. And it sort of comes through here and goes out there, and I shall remember a lot of it. But it's when the students and I are ferreting out, for example, how do I empower them to be more powerful than me, though I look like I'm more powerful than them? These are the questions I have, so that the classroom becomes a marketplace. I think John Littlewood said once, you know, a classroom should be a marketplace where everybody's arguing with each other and explaining the world to each other. I don't think I've answered that question at all, but it's where I am.
Well, it's okay. There's no right answers in life, I found out.
No.
I want to know then, we're drama people, so how should we apply your learning? As teachers, as drama teachers, do we take from it what we need?
Well, if I were God and I could lay my hands on...
Well, you are, let's face it, you are.
And I could lay my hands on you, I would say, what do we want the schools to be for? When I was in school, it was gorgeous because it provided me with things I couldn't have at home, like 2 pencils instead of my granny's half of a one in the teapot. Now the world is full of stuff. And we must begin to consider, do we wish our newborns up to our adults to be part of the culture that develops our land? And so I would say to you, you know, where do you stand in that? Because I want students. And I mean, you know, like, I remember when my granddaughter was born, and she was lying on my dining room table, and I said to Marianne, I'm going to put some Bach on. I don't have many bits of music, but I had some Bach. And I said, let's see if she moves. And of course, she moved immediately. The kicking began, and the shuffling, and the, you know, good old Bach. And I regard, you know, from that moment, she's a person, part of this adult world, so that we begin to help one another get together. We waste our children. And we're wasting our young adults. And we won't somehow relinquish the schooling system to embrace all the world, I've just been recently working with the Crown Prosecution Service. And I will hand it to the lawyers and judges. They are terrified of going into school. And partly they're terrified because they are used to the power role. And here am I saying, forget it. You know, this isn't going to work. And to my delight, they're working in pairs. And I am thrilled by the way high school students are coming and saying, how will I study law? And it's something to do with. Only they could do that. I can't. I'm not a lawyer. What I can do is help set it up so that children get very empowered and curious and begin to work like the Crown Prosecution Service. And changes are happening amongst the high school students in that school, in those schools, 10 schools in Derby, because some brave lawyers are trying to enable people to get interested, not tell them. And I find helping people to plan tasks that stop the teacher being the one that knows. When they said what they wanted to do in school, for example, they said, well, we've got these wonderful pictures. This is a courtroom. This is a county courtroom. This is a magistrate's courtroom. This is a children's court. You know, this is this. And I'm saying, forget it. What good is that? You know, they can get that off the telly. They can get it either through drama or they can get it through... Throw them away and get a roll of paper and say, what do you think the Crown Prosecution Service is? Now, I tested them on, what do you think the National Health is? And they were in exactly the same condition as the students were over the CPS, as you and I would be. Because we've all got different experiences of the National Health.
But they can go to the private, can't they?
And of course, they're preparing differently, and I think this is something that has to be addressed. How to prepare the mandatory enabling devices that set up the tasks, through the doing of which, and this is the drama area of it, the engagement with it, not having the outcome prophesied in advance.
So can the engagement happen without role?
Did you say without role?
Yes.
In this case, the engagement happened first through the materials they took out of envelopes, and saw some of them got witness statements. They got exactly what the Crown Prosecution Service gets in order to decide whether this shall go to court. They may of course have video materials, which we didn't provide deliberately. But all the evidences, the routines, the police putting the tape recorder on, I needed that help to get it correct. But what they were faced with was exactly what the Crown Prosecution Service is faced with, to take their decision. And when that decision was taken, then the court was set up, and then it became the actual routine of the court, which the lawyers, of course, could do, which I couldn't. And I find more and more and more, when I'm helping teachers, I almost have to turn their plans inside out. Because they somehow want to get too early to doing the thing you want, rather than how do you help people bring to you the knowledge they already have? And then how can you help focus that towards the areas when we realise together we're going to have to learn more about this, and we achieve. And I have a drawing of this that I use, which I can't do today. But to me, I always know how I will set up the inquiry so that they teach me what they know. And the first statement is very important. It's not only the words, it's what you have ready for them to protect them into revealing what they know, so that they can argue and so on and so on. And I do firmly believe in Bruner's thinking that if you want some cohesion in group thinking, not agreement, I'm not talking about that, icon, draw it, symbol, write it, and I always forget his third word, which is you are enacting it. And to me, I always go through icon, symbol, expression. So they're protected into the expression. So I spend my life sort of thinking, how did that work? Should symbol have come before? So when I'm dealing with it all the time.
How about framing it then?
Yes.
That's what you're doing?
Framing it, of course, is, if you think of a clock, 11:45 to 12 is, what do they know about this? What sort of attitudes do they have towards this? What social health is there in this group? This is 11:45 to 12. What am I learning from this about the children? It's still 11:45 to 12 when I'm saying, I suppose some of these things we agree with, and of course I've been writing as well, and I've encouraged scribbling. Public writing, the beginnings of collaborative learning begins at that moment. That's why the paper must be one long one, not little itsy bitsies. And it's when you say, have a walk round it, and anything you agree with, put a tick. And then iconically, you can see the agreement. It's coming up in your face. And at that point, I can cross that line to 12 to 3 in the way I'm talking. So really, I might say, for example, so really there seems to be a lot of punishment in this Crown prosecution lot, judging by all these ticks. And I'm waiting to see if that attracts. But it may be. I mean, I can only say what I can read. So I do have a classification system, of course, an observation system, because not only am I seeing how they're handling each other, do they share the pens, all the stuff that we know about, but what are they doing with me? I no longer kneel down easily, so I tend to say, do you mind just jotting this down for me? How do they take that? You know, is it on an equal basis? Or do they think it's an order? You know, where are we in this history of teacher, student? And who's the student, for goodness sake? You know? Now, it's the point I cross the line, my language shifts. I start using the inclusive we from now on forever, because I can't use you without it being me. We has to be so. And then I'm beginning slowly to test to see what can we agree on to do with Crown Prosecution Service or ambulance men or whatever. And this is the area when I start helping tool it a bit. So an aspect of tooling might be, so really what we're saying is, we look like we're going to need people to tell us what happened. That's the beginning of tooling. I'm not saying, so we need witnesses and this is going to be a court and so on. And the point at which I feel they're beginning to be really attracted, because this is attraction. Can it move to interest? Is it going to move to interest? What do I do to move it to interest? And there's about 9 stages, because what you want is productive obsession. And you're home and dry then. It can go. But you're going through this first attraction, comfortable attraction as well, not pressure, gradually interest. You might get a bit of concern. You might get a bit of inquiry. But in the long run, it's the productive obsession. Because we don't give them time for this. I've been so fortunate to have all my life productive obsession. You see, it started, I suppose I can remember it at school, saying when I was 3 in the cloakroom, and a lot of my friends, you know, we still meet occasionally, the old rocks of ages together. And I remember saying, well, of course, you know I'm going to be a film star. And I was as broad as I was long then, you know, I mean, going to be a film star. Now, that obsession really has stayed with me. It's changed, of course. I've never become a film star.
Oh, 3 Looms waiting.
But I've never forgotten.
We just showed 3 Looms last week in Canada.
Not really.
Yeah, we did.
If I did, I would cut out all the bits of me talking, because the students do still interest me very much. Mm-hmm. For example, in 3 Looms, I'm really interested in that group of young adults.
Yeah.
And the triremes and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's old, really.
So am I. You mentioned icons, so I want to take you to another area, and that's technology. You wrote the introduction to the drama book on technology. I read the introduction and the book. So you must have some thoughts on what we're going to do with the kids that are wireless and plugged in and earphoned and
mobile
to the teeth.
Yes, yes.
So what are we going to do? What is drama part of that? Is your kind of work a part of that? Do we ignore it? Do we say this is a different kind of work?
No, I don't think we can afford to ignore it. I don't know how to use it, but I have seen it have an amazing effect when children are explaining things to each other. I mean, I've only got a limited experience of it, but I know enough that when they say we could have a look on the internet, I know enough to say, show me what we'd find if we went for plants. And they do all their little picky things with what they do. And it is a marvellous way of helping them get the self-spectator when they're explaining things. I have to use an example,
Sure,
David.
Please.
When the children, the people in Hexham, who were invited by the National Health senior doctor in Hexham, the senior gynaecologist, and they were building, just after Raymond died, they were building a new National Health hospital. And the senior gynaecologist came up to school and said it's traditional in Hexham that this school would create the hospital garden. So like 70 years before, they'd created the cottage hospital garden. And he said, I would like, if it's possible, for the children of this school to create the new National Health Hospital garden, which is going to be like £50 million and this, that and the other. So I was asked if I would work on this hospital garden. And I could only have volunteers because the children who come to this school come by train from all over Northumberland and they're limited by the transport. So it had to be 3:30, sometimes. So between September and June 23rd, when they would present their ideas to the hospital garden, we met 10 times for an hour. I got them off timetable for one day, and then I got them off timetable for the 5 days before they presented to the doctors, nurses, all the architects, you know, all the big guys, their ideas on the hospital garden. The gynaecologist, and indeed everybody else, was expecting a nice, neat hospital garden. What they got, there were 30 students, all year 9, because there were no examinations that, you know, for them that year. They got 10 warnings that A, you haven't thought at all about your hospital garden. It's an afterthought, and they were not rude. It's an afterthought, and we're going to show you. And of course they used technology. The girls who said it begins with light. So we've been to Greenwich, or we've been to Greenwich on the internet, I suppose. But we've been to Greenwich, and we've worked out with a tennis ball and ribbons that your garden will have 10 minutes of direct sunlight on June the 21st of every year. And this, we're just warning you now that this is what you will get, because we've looked at the model, we've looked at the sight lines, and that's what you get. And these were not cheeky kids. They were saying, we're worried for you, because, you know, our babies will be born in this hospital, perhaps. We may ourselves come in for operations. And it's not going to be a very good, warm garden, you know, at this rate, because we can't all be poorly at 10 to 12 on June the 25th. So you got 10 groups. And I was so impressed by the children's ability to use the computers. For example, the group of boys, a group of about 5 boys, said, we'll do the plants. Of course, they went on the internet, and the biologist in the school, who was very helpful, said, you get all the plants. And of course, he'd worked at Kew, so that was really handy. And he said, I'll go through them now with you, with the sunlight. So you can decide what you need. So, of course, these kids did an amazing presentation, which they could only build in 1 week, because I couldn't got them off timetable. So 10 different shocking ideas were presented. I just must tell you one lovely story. The 3 girls were looking at furniture, and they walked around Hexham, they looked on the internet, and they said, no naff seating, no naff decking, no naff hanging bloody baskets. You see?
What does
So
naff
I'm
mean,
saying
Dorothy? What does naff
naff
mean?
means sort of ridiculous,
Oh, okay.
tiddly-winky stuff, you know, nonsense. And there was a lot of television programmes, weren't there, about naff decking. So I said, well, what are we left with? They said, well, we'll go around, and they'd found a glassmaker in Hexham, a Swedish glassmaker, who said, yes, you could do furniture in glass. He could deal with that and help them see how that would work. And they didn't like the garden benches. They thought they were ridiculous, really, and they sat on them and said, my back doesn't fit this, and they tested my back on them a bit, you know. And by one of those wonderful miracles, there was an exhibition of architect-designed furniture. Now, Raymond and I had been to this exhibition some time before all this had come up. And we'd seen these sort of strange seats. And Raymond said, well, I don't know, that they look, they're not fit for purpose. Because he was an engineer, you know, fit for purpose. No. So I thought no more of these. The kids had been, and they'd seen them. And they're called boos. And they were like poofs. And when you approached them, they changed colour and murmured. Murmured. So they'd gone, I had 9 members of staff interested in this, And they were wonderful. They helped whenever I could call on them. And occasionally I made them do things that were unfamiliar to them. So they'd gone to the head of classics and said, we want to phone America because we want to buy some booze. She said, you can't phone America. We will. We need to phone America. You said we could do this garden and we're going to phone America. Well, this poor woman in America, they got to first go off, check the clock. She thought she was going to sell booze to the whole of the National Health, you know, whereas they were just inquiring, does this colour fade after a while, you know, is it batteries or what, is it LED lights, does this talking ever fade and go all of a mutter, you know, and are they waterproof? And, of course, the head of classics is listening to this, counting the money, you know, working on. And, of course, she said they were going to be waterproof. It was just an exhibition that had been put in this big hall. I can't remember the hall now, but it's in Northumberland. And they would be waterproof, especially for National Health, you know. Yes. And she must have said, how many did you want? And they said, well, it's just an inquiry at the moment. And we didn't get the booze, of course, but they did demonstrate the booze, how they'd be very good if you had bad hips. They would be wonderful for laying babies on because they sank in the middle if necessary, and so on. But they gave 10 amazing technological presentations. And they made it do whizzy things, you know, going backwards and forwards. But there's one thing they couldn't handle. I said, I think we should give them a gift when we go down to talk to them, because they're going to be very disappointed with this, you know. So we will give them a gift of stories of the garden. And they said, we don't write. I said, well, we will write. We will write stories of the garden. There'll be 35. They said, but we don't write, Dorothy. The deputy head, there are 4 deputy heads in this school, said, oh, we can easily put it on the computer. I said, we're not. We're writing it. So I got them off school for a day. And we started with plain white paper with lines, and then we went on to plain white paper with no lines. And Marianne had given me for Mother's Day a beautiful Tiffany card of snowdrops. So they put that, the technology put that in the background. And then we got all these colours. And they came in at 8:30, and they had coloured pens, plain pens, you know what. And we would create a book, and we would hand one of these gifts to each doctor, nurse, architect, whatever, and we'll all get one as well. And it started. And of course, they kept coming over and saying, how do you spell this? And I'm saying, do you want me to cross these things out, or are you going to cross them out, or what are we doing? Well, you cross them out because it would be quicker. And I found myself having to mark this for a while, but gradually not. But this lovely boy came over and he said, I don't write. I said, well, not at all. He said, no, I just don't write. I said, well, you've had a pen in your hand, like, and you've... Oh, yeah, he said, but I don't write. I don't put words together. So I said, well, I suppose a story can begin with just, like, anything, like it could begin with I. So he went away and he came back with this wonderful line. I'm swanning about over the, and it was, I can't remember his word, but it was the metal plate that goes over the drains and there's warmth comes up. I'm swanning about having had a nice sleep. I am the hospital cat. So I said, well, that looks all right. Do you want me to spell cat with a kicking cur or a curly cur? He says, well, whichever you think. You know, we were at that. He worked all day. I said, have you got a spell check? I've heard of spell checks. I've never used them because I have a dictionary, but, you know. He said, yeah, I've got a spell check, but, you know. I said, well, try that. No, I haven't time for the spell check, he said. So I was his spell check with the dictionary. This was his story. And, you know, he would copy it out, and halfway down he'd get a misspelling, and he'd go. And I'd give him a new sheet of paper. And he went on, he got on to colours, and then he would get 3/4 of the way down and there'd be another mistake. He'd go, take it away. 3:30, and he has this story. I am swanning about, and he talks about his tail and the feel of the garden, because of course they've been designing the garden. And he hears a sound like he remembers kittens make. And nobody's gonna bring kittens into my garden that I've got anything to do, nothing to do with. So he's looking for a female with kittens, but he finds a small human with a head down. And that funny mewling noise is coming from her. So he thinks, sometimes cats and humans can get on. So I'll try a bit of a rub. And so I put up a paw, and she looked at me. So I put up 2 paws. And he really keeps coming with misspellings, you know, and taking it away and writing it again. Until in the end, he's on her knee. And he sees a big, tall human coming and thinks, do I go or do I stay? But he takes the chance and he stays. And he knows the tall human is talking in a different way to the child. He gets this. On the very bottom line, he has a misspelling. The deputy head has been in, and he's a great guy, you know. And the lad has said to him, he's writing right down at the bottom, and he suddenly realises he's done it again, and he says, she's not going to like this one either. It was his 15th draft, and he made it for 3:45, and it's in the book. And this wonderful book of stories, myths, are remarkable. It's a wonderful thing. The computers wouldn't have done that.
So I'm thinking then, this is your commissioner work, right?
Yes.
I'm thinking that they weren't enrolled for the first part, were they?
They were always mentally commissioners. They came in, signed up as commissioners. They went through all the rituals of commissioners. First names were used throughout, even the 9 members of staff. For this, first names. I addressed them as commissioners all the time.
That's very helpful in looking at commissioner work. I understand that now. Thank you, that was very helpful.
But everything they did, they thought as commissioners about designing gardens.
Right. That's so helpful, Dorothy. I was working with a class, and they were 4th graders, 9-year-olds, and they had read the novel Chasing Vermeer. Do you have that novel? Anybody know that novel? What's about it's an adolescent or a young adult novel where the paintings of Vermeer are stolen and they have to find them, so the kids discover them. It's quite an exciting mystery thing. So a young boy was very proud. It's my first novel I've read, and he was 9. I said, well, that's great. Who was Vermeer? I have no idea. Oh, that's too bad, because it's the whole book. But with Dorothy always standing beside me, I go, we'll have to discover who he is. Go to the computer and look him up. That's how I do it, Dorothy. So, but I have a point.
Very sensible.
Yes. So he came back and says he was Dutch. Excellent. And what does Dutch mean? I don't know what Dutch means. backwards. Go find out, because we're all talking about other books we've read. And he was born in Holland in 1650 or something, and he was a painter, and his paintings were very famous. Young man, that's excellent. And what's that got to do with your book? Well, they were famous paintings. Why were they famous? I don't know. Well, why don't you find me those paintings, and I'll look at them and see. Where would I find them? In the computer. So he came back and said, it won't print in color. I said, well, go to the principal's office. They have a color printer. And the headmaster. And he went down there and came back in 10 minutes, Dorothy, with 6 colored paintings of Vermeer that we put on the wall. And I could get up and examine them. Tell me why they were stolen. What's good about these? And I realized that technology had such power. And you just described it so beautifully with the information they can find if they know why they're going.
Right.
And you taught me that just then, that we set that scene up. We just don't send them over there.
Yes.
But in my defense, he had read the book at least. But I think it can't be an enemy.
Yes. One of the wonderful things they did with the garden, and the staff did it first. For the second meeting, I said to the staff, the children have written down, the commissioners, of course, I'd said, write down every kind of garden we know between us. So you got water gardens, you got a big list of maybe 30 or 40. And one girl said, I've forgotten its name now, but it's the one that's, sorry, this is old age. It's to do with the atmosphere, has to be just right. What's the word? Hydroponic. Pardon? No, it doesn't matter anyway. She was going to have this garden in whatever. So we get this vast list of gardens on long paper. They then talk to the staff about, because the staff are told, you listen, you nod, you write down. You don't interrogate. You just go, right, yes. So that all the ideas you get down, because you're being a scribe for speed, you get this. So we got, and one of the ones was great interest in water gardens. So I asked the staff to write me, each of them, all 9 of them, bearing in mind what the children had told them, a garden voice. I am the water garden. And they said, you mean, we? Yeah, I said, yes. I'll do the feng shui, that's the word. I'll do the feng shui one, because I think it's impossible, but I will do that one. So we got water garden, we got all these different gardens, the wild garden and so on. And I said, I'm going to blindfold the people when they come in. You see, this is Aristotle's means. By what means? I owe this to Eileen Pennington and that book she's done on maths. By what means will we teach? We don't question that we'll teach, but by what means? And it's this invention of means that I've been hearing about from you people all these days, because you've all got different means. Now, I have indirect means. I like metaphor, and I like the challenge for me to find a means. So I'm blindfolding all the commissioners to listen to the water garden. That puts a big pressure on the head of classics, who's written it. And 9 times they are going to listen to 9 gardens. And they can take their blindfolds off to make a quick note, because they don't write, a quick note of any images. And so the thing moves, halting episodic steps. Gavin took part in this because I wanted them. They needed to go into Hexham and talk to the people. What's a hospital garden? But the statistician, who was one of the staff members and lovely, but she never taught anybody younger than 18. So she was into statistics. And these forms you fill in, and all you're trying to do is buy a packet of biscuits in the co-op. And somebody says, do you mind just filling in this form? And I'm saying, no, you can't do that. So we needed rolls. Well, I got the most ancient, decrepit shopping people, one of whom was Gavin, who couldn't remember what Cynthia wanted at the Tesco's, I think it was. But you see, the children were going through an amazing exercise. This means I got them all to write letters. So the first thing the children did was teach the staff the person they could find in the letter. What can we anticipate when this person comes into the co-op or Tesco's, because they said different shoppers, different money, and so on. So they're teaching the staff how to read into a missive. Now, one of the missives was written by a young handicapped man, in the sense of he's a very slow learner. He's about like a slow-thinking junior. And he's a great guy. He's got a girlfriend in London, and he was going to Graceland. So, of course, I said, write me a letter, David, about you're going to Graceland this summer, and he was going to go with a young man, also from the theatre company, who's dying of cancer. So we had to have a male go with the male. Then we had to have a nurse to go in case Paul died. So David is going to buy a suitcase, a suitcase. So he's going into Tesco's. Obviously Tesco's don't sell suitcases, or they didn't then anyway in Hexham. But that's his letter. Well, of course, they're looking at this. And they're saying, Graceland, you can't go to Graceland. It was opened for 2 weeks that year, and it's not been open since. That's why Paul had to go, because Paul does an Elvis Presley. Silver suit, shoes, the lot. So it was essential before he dies that Paul goes to Graceland. Well, of course, when they're faced, they've made up their mind that this person tells lies, of course. You can't believe a word this guy says. And he comes in with the plane ticket. And he is going to Graceland. And it's these means. Now, the statistician was wonderful when she got the answers, because they did go into Hexham and they did talk to the people, and they stopped interrogating. You've got to learn to ask questions without interrogating. And so on. I do go on a long time, David. You're
Take your
being very
time.
patient.
Take your time. I have the ability
But
to draw
the
you out.
means to me is the total... I wasn't listening then.
You don't listen.
We have to teach people. We have to teach people to invent the means to serve the need. And the training at the moment doesn't do it. Because they can't tap their own knowledge. I don't ever know enough. I don't know about you.
I quite often do, but not always. I don't know anything. I'm Canadian.
Well, I feel the same. I feel the same.
We come here to see you.
But, well, I don't know why you do, really, because I only just get up and get on. I mean it.
Today I figured out why.
I feel honoured. I appreciate it. At the same time, I think, what the hell is all this about? Get on with your lives. I mean it. I do mean it. I do mean it.
Clapping for you, silly people.
And to me, one of the most important things is you don't say, I can't teach this because I don't know it.
Exactly.
What you say is, well, what do I know that might start it off? I've taught many a text that I've never read.
I'm most
serious.
Teachers,
I'm
think.
doing it, finding a way to begin it. John O'Toole, when he taught in Felling, said to me, can you teach Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida in Middle English?
Well, of course.
Of course. I said yes. Because, I said, have you got, are we talking about Shakespeare? No, he said, we're not. We're talking about Chaucer. Now, you see, it's tapping. Well, what can I do? I knew they'd been dealing with the Middle English in some ham-fisted way. But he said, their exam is in a fortnight, A-levels. And I'm saying, and you expect me to deal with Chaucer's, And I looked at it, of course, in translation, not in Middle English. And I thought, right, what this needs, it's not a cartoon thing, but it's a reduction process. That's the way I learned the book a bit. Like Pandarus sort of consults his horoscope before he goes to Paris and says, why don't you do your own courting? Why do you need me to do your courting? And Paris says, well, I don't know how to do this. So Pandarus goes next door to consult his horoscope. Then he comes back and he says to Paris, Troilus, I mean, not Paris, next Thursday's a good day. So this is what you do. I'll have the candle, you get the bed, and I'll see you right. You see, and I'm writing it like this. In fact, my housekeeper was writing it with me because she was doing Act 2 while I was doing Act 1. I mean, great affiliations, me and my cleaners. And no, I mean it. And of course, I said to the students, I can't read Middle English. Are you all right on Middle English? And they went sort of, well, but I have, I think, got the story, but it'll go right round the hall. So they said, well, all right. So I laid out the story, and it did go round the hall. It's a hell of a long book. What I didn't know was book 6 had been cut out. And here's me having written book 6 up and all, which is the heart of the story. The fact that turns it into the code of courtly love and faith. And they've cut it out. It's ridiculous.
I agree.
That's right. But this is the interesting thing. I said, walk past it with a pen in your hand. And if you think it mattered to Troilus or Cressida, put a big tick. So they're going around like zombies reading this because I've written it in public writing. And they're putting ticks. There's your 11:45. And at the end, there's a girl who said to me, the trouble with this is Troilus is such a wet. And I'm saying, what's that? Well, he can't do his own courting. Oh, I see, he's a wet because he... Well, of course he is. It's ridiculous. She's crying at the other end. Because I've invented one small statement. I can't remember the name of the man who slew him when she went over to the Greeks. But it ended with where, whatever his name is, slew him into everlasting life. And she's crying. And I have a great faith in people walking past and through scripts. Because I don't want people to improvise Chaucer.
One that April with a shore such at the drought marted passage of the route. Middle English, Dorothy, I'm sorry. We speak it in Canada. Dorothy, I just figured why you're here.
Oh, I'm so glad you
Because
did.
you let us work alongside you. And I saw you in every workshop, talking and doing and working and being. That's why we like you here. We need to work as we do with our students, as you do with us when we are your students. Mm-hmm. You let us work. At this conference, you let us work alongside you.
That's really
as you
nice
always
of you,
do.
I need you.
Well, you never chose me for your partner. And that scares me. I just realized, Dorothy, who you are. You are feng shui. you let us know where we should be and how it should work,
that's nice.
so we are all healthier and aesthetically stronger. That's who you are.
That's nice. I shall tell my granddaughter I am feng shui.
Please do.
It's going to be very interesting.
And when I came to study with Gavin, and his wife fed me, and Dorothy challenged me, well, Gavin did too, I did a degree here and I had to write a thesis. And when I first came, Dorothy, I gave it to Gavin to read, and I had spent all my money coming here, and it was a big deal. And may I tell them what you said about it, Gavin?
Okay.
Dorothy, I'm getting to you in a minute.
Yes, I'll bet you do.
He said, this is washing hung on a line in random order.
Because he's clever.
So all the way back to Canada, I'm on the airplane going, washing hung on a line. I know it means something. And when I got back and read it at home, that's what it was. Everything I owned hung on a line in a random order. And I had to write a thesis. And that taught me how to do theses for the next 30 years. So I can never thank you enough. But the other part of the story, Dorothy, is you marked my thesis. You were my external reader.
I know.
And you said this. You said this in your feng shui way. You said, nothing in here good till we get to chapter 4. And chapter 4 is where you talk about your work, where you actually interpret data and make meaning. She's absolutely right. So, and then you gave me the most wonderful advice of my life. You said, I wish you had written your thesis on pliofilm. Pliofilm, saran wrap, plastic wrap.
Oh.
And then I wish you would hang it from the branches of a tree. So as the wind came, the pieces would overlap and you would see new meaning.
Yes.
And I think I did that. I think I've done that symbolically for 30 years, and my work keeps changing and growing. And every time I meet you and every time I meet Gavin, I'm altered. And in reading your book and hearing your life again and living through so much of it, I realize that the wind is blowing again and changing those pliofilm words, so the new words are emerging constantly.
I'm afraid so, yes.
And
yes, it isn't that the old words disappear, but they've sort of gone in and I've forgotten to even mention them. But the old means are there. But I get these, and I think I've said this to Gavin when we've been talking. Somebody will say something to me and it puts a beam of light that's like a laser. And I suddenly realise I can now name something or talk about it. And it's such a privilege when you meet people who do that to you. And if I may, if there's still a minute to do it with, I was teaching in New York, not this last summer, but it was this last summer. And I always hold a lot of tutorials in Hmong if people want them. So for 15 minutes, people come along and with their questions, they really stimulate me to find means for them. This lassie says, I am privileged to be married to a man who is very wealthy and supports me in what I want to do. I want to buy a farm. In fact, she said, we bought the land and I want to make it a school a month at a time for children who never really can get away for any time where they are dealing with animals. Well, of course, I dig into the bit I know and I say, well, I think you should see Michael Mapurgo because that's the only man I know who's got a farm in Devon and uses his book royalties to pay for it. She said, well, you know, who is this? So I trot out a few titles, and his writing is strong, and he's the children's laureate, as he was last year. She comes next day, another tutorial. I've been on the internet. I've arranged to go over to Devon, and I'm going to see Michael Mapurgo's wife, who is busy running this place. So then she said, you know the way you teach according to the Thomas Jefferson system of education. And I thought, oh, me and Thomas Jefferson. I said, I didn't know he had a system. Oh, yes, she said. There's a whole college in America dedicated to teaching according to Thomas Jefferson's system of education. So I said, tell me about it. She said, I'll get you the CDs. Another tutorial. Comes in, 2 CDs, and just in case you're so out of touch, here's the machine, you put it over your ears, you put it in and you press the button and you'll hear the lectures. Now the thing that is amazing, and this is my homework because I've just written it up, and I can give you it, I realised I had a copy of it, right. This young man is saying there are 3 styles of learning taught in the world as we know it. We're talking about the West. One is the conveyor belt system. And in the conveyor belt system, we test, we put people in sets. It has an honourable history. It was invented by manufacturers who needed literate weavers, who could understand, well, not just weavers, of course, who could deal with the dangers of heat, power, and speed in the machines. So we need literate people. They will earn wages of a different kind. The bartering will get less, and the money will be how we are paying them. The person who learns this way, the curriculum is the textbook. You write the text you want them to understand, and you teach them how to read the text. And what that system teaches is what to think. And the person who embarks on that, from the very early days, and indeed today, because I see it sometimes in my doctor's surgery when I'm working with the nurses, you work till you can retire. And this is not to demean that, because I started out that way. I didn't end that way, because I haven't retired. But I hear people in the doctor's surgery, white-haired people like me, saying, well, he's at home all the time now, you know, and we don't really know how to get on, you know, this sort of thing, which is what the nurses are coping with. Now, the second system is the system of professional education. This is very competitive. And to start a professional education, you must have, according to the West, you've got good marks in your conveyor belt system. So I didn't have good marks in my conveyor belt system. I went straight to the mill. In this system, you must learn in a certain order that makes it possible for you to practice your profession. So you can't say, oh, I was laughing about this with my dentist the other day because I said, you've done a proper professional education at Newcastle, haven't you, in the dental school? He said, yes. And if I didn't learn how to deal with teeth, you would be in agony right now, you see. So we were laughing over this. You know what you must learn, and you are committed enough to realise if you want a profession, you'd better learn it. Now, the professions in the past, as we know, were the law, the church, and medicine. But now, I go to have my car MOT'd, and I've got a young man who's professionally engaged with a very complicated computer system that only he can read and I can't. So the professions are widening and widening. Now, your professional education brings 2 things: morality and responsibility. And the person who begins to lead in their profession runs up constantly against the moral codes that they're working amongst You see this in medicine all the time, cloning cows and people together and so on. And responsibility for outcomes. But the curriculum for the professional is the case study. How have other people tackled this? What can we learn from what they have done? And your case studies can go way, way back to the Stone Age, in stone, as well as writing, as well as tools and artifacts. There is no year of the case study. Case studies are forever, and they are constantly evolving. They're in today's news on BBC 4 or whatever. Those people, when they retire, if they retire, they often become mentors of the younger ones. You see this in our hospital system. When it's working well, your senior registrars, your consultants are mentoring through. And then there's the third system, which is the leadership way of learning. Now, the leadership way of learning doesn't go to case studies. It goes to the first sources. Vermeer is an example. In this, the leader needs mentors. The leader, the aspirant leader, and if as a teacher you want them to be aspirant leaders, you watch their interests and you mentor and service these interests. Leaders do not retire. They can't retire. What they do is constantly reinvent, rethink, return around the same areas. But leaders put dissonant things together and get wholeness. They don't go chunk, 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 chunk. As your professional model, I expect my doctor to know what to do. So I don't want her to keep saying, well, actually, I've been photographing the same tree for 35 years, so I really am very qualified to deal with your bruises. And what I learned from this, and I'll be ever grateful to this lassie, why Mantle of the Expert works in empowering students is the textbook is useless for a start. Because you can't hand one textbook to 35 children, some of whom are dealing with hamsters found in woods, that found in fax machines, as I was dealing with last year, because we were running the town tip, and had to deal with a dead hamster in a fax machine. You can't say, oh, there's a textbook on that. I'll just get around that. That's right, read this. I'm saying, have you told anybody? She says, it's flat. Well, no, there's no textbook. You know, somebody else is coming over and said, we've got 15 computers they've thrown out over the weekend, and so on and so on. So, in Mantle of the Expert, you go to case studies, and you go to the first sources. That's why in New York, in dealing with a vineyard, I went to Virgil. Not because he's necessarily the best, but a textbook on vines is not what they need. They want that making strange of Virgil's direct ruminations on the growing of vines. And they take to it like ducks to water. And I've used it with 7-year-olds. You don't need to water Virgil down. You just need the means to make him available. Now, to me, this is why I was lecturing on it in Athens, because I can't lecture on anything else yet till I've understood it better. And I now know. I watch teachers learning to mentor in Mantle of the Expert. They fall into it. if they can once stop knowing it all, they start finding things. This painting might do it, or I'll draw a tree, that might do it. And the mentoring begins to happen to the teacher. And certainly, there is no mantle of the expert you can think of in this world that does not require case studies. What did they do at Kew with tulips? We better check that out. I was working with some children, 75% Muslim, Indian, Arab, and so on. And we're looking at case studies. The first case study is the park, the trees. The second case study, because they don't read very well yet in English, is the gardener who's got to plant 1,000 for Mr. Strutt in 1810 and needs a lot of hands. And the toolbox, the gardener's tools in her hands, it's a lady, her green wellies, she is the case study. The park is the place. And all the time, this has shaken me up again, and it's always happening, and it's always somebody else who does it for me. And I am so grateful, because now I know I can teach Mantle of the Expert better. I don't know yet how, but I know I've got some keys. And I know when I'm watching people trying it, I'm alerted in a totally different way. And this is why the children, when it is working well, turn around and say, I've never worked as hard in all my life, Mrs. Heathcote, but by gee, you know, we found who owns the dead hamster at anyway, you know. And I said, well, I'm glad of that. What are you going to do with it? So we decided to make it into a cushion, because that way she'll be more comforted, you know. And of course, all the time in this town tip, they are giving me case studies. We found a wedding ring in a gentleman's suit. I said, do you think it was meant? No, we think somebody, listen to this, the hypothesising. We think somebody's got rid of her husband's suit, and we don't know whether she wants to get rid of him, or whether she doesn't know his wedding ring, or why has he taken his wedding ring off and put it in his suit? What's he pretending to be? And all this hypothesising. Well, what are we going to do? We'll put it in the Derby Times. Any gentleman who has mislaid, I said, let's not put lost. It looks a bit careless. Mislaid a wedding ring, approach, and they're saying the town tip. I'm saying the recycling unit. It might be a very rich man that doesn't want to come to the town tip in his big car, you know. So this, we get this. They, of course, get on the telephone, which is only this sort. It doesn't, never a real one. And they found not the gentleman, but the wife. And she's coming in, and I'm saying, do you need the wife, or can you deal with it? No, it's all right, Mrs. Heathcote. We'll deal with it in our office. So I'm not surprised, you see. They come in and say, we've dealt with it. Right, that's okay. Is it the suit that's gone back, or the wedding ring? Well, she didn't want the suit, but we've wrapped the wedding ring up, and she's ever so glad, because she's had another thought. So she's going to bring it back. Not, she's glad she's found it. It's much more subtle. She's had another thought. And I'm saying, I think that bodes well, do you? We think so, you see. And truly, I am so grateful for this last. And in a way, I haven't told you anything that you probably didn't know, but I didn't know that till I heard this long lecture. And then the dear lass sent me the book, apologising for all her scribbles in it, which are gold for me. And from now on, I'm going to do it better, I think. So you can
Well,
have the article.
that actually brings us to our time, Dorothy. I think I've taken too much of the time. I feel
No,
guilty.
you haven't.
But, and you have no time for questions, well, I think I pretty well asked the best ones. And there will be time at dinner where you sit with people at dinner and
Yeah.
talk, as you always do,
I always
because you
do
give
that.
so much, Dorothy.
That's so nice of you to let me chelp on, because again, you see, explaining it, I'm a bit nearer to understanding it again.
Dorothy, it's who I am. I just have to do that. In my country and in America, in the United States, we give Dorothy Heathcote standing ovations.
Oh, please.